He didn't belong here. That's what they thought the moment he stepped through the gates of Rosebridge Academy. To them, he was just another black kid with a scholarship and a dream. Someone who got lucky. Someone who didn't earn his place. The type they whisper about in locker rooms and joke about in group chats. The kind they expect to stay silent, stay small, stay grateful. But Jameer DeSantis wasn't here to fit in. He didn't flinch when the whispers started. He didn't lower his eyes when they stared. He didn't smile politely when their smirks turned sharp. He walked in like he'd walked into every room his whole life, with quiet steps, steady breath, and the kind of calm that only comes from knowing exactly who you are. Rosebridge was a fortress of generational wealth and unspoken rules. Marble floors, manicured lawns, and names that stretched back to colonial bloodlines. It wasn't a place built for outsiders, especially not ones who looked like Jameer. He didn't wear designer clothes, but everything he wore was clean, neat, precise. His hair was twisted back into clean locks. His backpack was simple, no flashy brand names, no wild colors. His shoes, plain white, no crease. That alone made some kids uncomfortable. The fact that he cared about his appearance without flaunting it. The fact that he didn't try to be liked. He didn't need to be liked. The halls were loud that morning, laughs bouncing off lockers, sneakers scuffing against tile, the high-pitched shriek of gossip and rumors flying faster than the morning bell. But as Jameer walked by, things got quieter. Not silent, just heavier. People noticed, but pretended they didn't. He passed a group of girls by the water fountain. One whispered, "Who's the new guy?" Another replied, "Probably just here for the diversity quota." In a history class, someone leaned to their friend and said under their breath, "Bet he's gonna start some activist club or something." In gym, one of the football players chuckled as he watched Jameer tie his sneakers. "Better watch your stuff around him, man." The jokes weren't loud. They never are. Not at places like Rosebridge. The racism here wore cologne and smiled during parent-teacher meetings. It was subtle, educated, polished. Jameer had seen it before, too many times. At his last school they called it banter. Before that it was boys just being boys. Everywhere he went, the story was the same. But this time, it wasn't. Because Jameer wasn't here to play along. Ryan Chase saw him before lunch, saw the way Jameer walked, straight-backed, slow, measured, like he had nothing to prove and no one to impress. That bothered Ryan. Ryan was used to being the center of every room. Everyone laughed louder when he joked. Teachers gave him the benefit of the doubt. Even when he was wrong, people nodded along. Being rich helped. Being white helped more. So when he saw someone like Jameer walking in like he didn't owe anyone an explanation, Ryan felt challenged. And Ryan hated feeling challenged. So he did what he always did. He started small. A casual shoulder check in the hallway between classes. A fake apology with a smirk. A loud joke in the locker room that wasn't funny, but made the others laugh anyway. "Careful," he said, nudging his friend. "Don't make him mad. You know how they get." Everyone chuckled. Jameer didn't. He just looked at Ryan. For half a second. Nothing dramatic. No threat. Just a look. One that said, "I see you, and I'm not impressed." That annoyed Ryan even more. The thing about people like Ryan is they're addicted to reaction. They poke and prod and push until you break. Because your reaction is the real prize. The fear, the anger, the humiliation. And when you don't give it to them, they spiral. The next day, Ryan stepped it up. He walked by Jameer in the hallway and let his books accidentally drop to the floor. "Oh, sorry," he said with that fake, sincere voice. Jameer didn't pick them up. He just stepped around them. By third period, the whispers were louder. "He's too quiet. Thinks he's better than us. He's got attitude." All because he didn't play their game. All because he didn't flinch. Ryan wasn't used to someone not needing his approval, not needing to explain themselves, not even needing to win, just choosing not to engage. And Jameer? He kept doing what he always did. Showed up, took notes, walked home, no noise, no drama, no fear. But even silence makes noise when you're not used to it. By the end of the week, Ryan knew one thing. This kid wasn't going to crack, but he hadn't given up yet. Because deep down, Ryan still thought he was the one in control. He didn't realize yet. He'd already lost it. Ryan Chase had been the king of Rosebridge for 3 years straight. Not officially, of course. There were no crowns, no thrones, just power, quiet, unchallenged power, the kind built on bloodlines, status, charm, and just the right amount of fear. Teachers smiled more when he walked in. Coaches gave him extra minutes on the field. Students either followed him or got out of his way. That's how it had always been. Until Jameer. Ryan couldn't put his finger on it at first. It wasn't like Jameer was doing anything wrong. He wasn't starting drama, wasn't trying to climb the social ladder, wasn't even trying to be seen. That was what irritated Ryan the most. The new kid walked the halls like they were his, like he didn't care what anyone thought of him, like he didn't even notice the invisible hierarchy that ran the school. Ryan noticed it. He was the hierarchy. Every room Jameer entered got quieter, not because people respected him, but because they didn't know how to treat him. He didn't give them cues, no jokes to laugh at, no forced smiles, no performative small talk. He was unreadable, and Ryan hated that. He didn't like things he couldn't predict. He liked people who responded the way they were supposed to, the way they always had. So Ryan made it his mission, not because Jameer did anything wrong, but because Jameer existed without his permission. He started with the subtle tactics. That first week, Ryan treated him like a science experiment. Shoulder bumps, loud jokes about diversity hires, eye rolls when Jameer answered a question in class. Just enough to test the waters. No reaction, not a word, not a change in expression. Jameer's silence felt like disrespect, like defiance, like he was looking through Ryan, not at him, and it infuriated him. By Friday, Ryan had decided it was time to escalate. Lunchtime. The cafeteria was always his arena. His voice carried above the rest. His friends sat around him like an entourage. If Ryan laughed, everyone laughed. If Ryan stared, everyone else turned. Jameer sat alone as always, far corner, back table, eating slowly, like he was somewhere else in his mind. Ryan stood up, stretched, and walked over. He raised his voice, just enough so the people nearby would hear. Not the teachers, though. Never them. Well, look who's having lunch with all his fans. Laughter. Forced, nervous. Jameer kept eating, didn't look up, didn't flinch. Ryan stepped closer. You know, it's kind of sad, sitting all by yourself every day. Guess no one wants to sit with the special admit, huh? The table around Ryan roared with laughter. A few kids nearby glanced over but quickly looked away. Jameer didn't stop eating. He didn't respond. Ryan's smirk faded just a little. He grabbed the edge of Jameer's tray and, without warning, flipped it. The sound of clattering silverware and a splattering of food echoed through the cafeteria like a dropped bomb. Sauce on his shirt, milk dripping from the corner of the table, food sliding down onto the floor. And still, Jameer just sat there. He placed his fork down slowly, looked down at his ruined lunch, took a breath. Then he looked up, right at Ryan. No anger, no shock, just that same quiet, steady gaze, like a mirror, showing Ryan exactly who he was, exactly what he looked like. For the first time, Ryan felt small. No one cheered, no one clapped him on the back. The laughter had faded. The silence grew loud. Ryan expected retaliation. He wanted it, needed it. If Jameer had stood up, pushed him, shouted, cursed, then Ryan could play the victim, could get him kicked out, could regain control. But Jameer stood, wiped his hands with a napkin, and walked away. Nothing else. And it was that silence, that refusal to give Ryan what he wanted, that stung the most. He didn't just walk away from the mess. He walked away like he'd won. Ryan stood frozen, and in that moment, Something started to shift. The whispers didn't stop when Ryan entered a room anymore. They kept going. They weren't loud, but they were different. Curious, hesitant. By the next morning, things got worse. It started with a sophomore, barely anyone, mumbling something to his friend in the hallway. DeSantis. That name sounds familiar. That's all it took. One name. One whisper. By lunchtime, people were Googling it under the table. Jameer DeSantis. Some thought it was a coincidence, until someone pulled up a photo. A grainy news article from a decade ago. A man in a suit. Stern face, black tie, shadowed by bodyguards, standing next to a judge, a congressman. Angelo DeSantis. A name tied to politics, to construction deals, to rumors. Not the kind of rumors you hear at school. The kind whispered about at country clubs. The kind where people stopped talking when someone walked into the room. People didn't know much, but they knew enough. That Jameer's father wasn't just rich. He was powerful, and not the mayor smiles on TV kind of powerful, the kind that didn't make threats, the kind that made people disappear, legally. Ryan didn't believe it at first, until he got home and mentioned the name at dinner. His dad stopped cutting his steak. "What did you just say?" "Jameer DeSantis. He goes to school with me." A long pause. His father put down his fork. "Leave him alone." "Why?" "Because I said so." His father had never said that before. Ryan had been caught with weed in sophomore year. His dad got him out of it. When he was failing math, he got the teacher fired. When Ryan cheated on a test and got caught, his dad got it scrubbed from his record. But now, no defense, no negotiation, just that look, that fear. And suddenly, Ryan understood. This wasn't just about school anymore. This was about something bigger, something deeper. He hadn't bullied the wrong kid. He'd declared war on someone who didn't need to fight back to win. And now, the war had already started, and Ryan was the only one who didn't know. Ryan Chase felt it before he understood it. At first, it was just a feeling, something subtle, a tightness in the air, a pressure in his chest that hadn't been there before. The hallway still looked the same, the faces were still familiar, but the way they looked at him, that had changed. People used to part for him. Students shifted when he walked by. Some high-fived him. Others laughed at his jokes, even the cruel ones. Teachers tolerated his arrogance because of his last name. He was Ryan Chase. And in Rosebridge Academy, that meant something. But now they watched him, not with fear, with caution, with curiosity, with something close to pity. He tried to brush it off, told himself it was all in his head, that he was still in control, that nothing had changed, but everything had. He walked into the locker room and found two of his closest boys whispering. As soon as they saw him, they went silent. One of them forced a smile, nodded. The other wouldn't even meet his eyes. Ryan cracked a joke, loud, biting, a jab about another student's shoes. No one laughed. He tried again during practice, shouting across the field, making fun of the new kicker. Normally, that'd get a roar of laughter. Silence. Even coach didn't react, didn't pat him on the back, didn't give him his usual "that's my guy" nod. Instead, practice ended early. Coach pulled him aside. "You okay?" "Yeah," Ryan said quickly, confused. "Why?" Coach stared for a second, then just said, "Stay focused," and walked away. The words meant nothing, but the tone, that meant everything. Ryan wasn't the predator anymore. He just hadn't accepted it yet. By the next day, his frustration turned to obsession. He started searching Jameer online, looked up his last name again, found newer articles, business deals, court appearances, speculation blogs, but nothing concrete. The kind of power you can't Google, the kind that operates through silence and reputation. At school, the whispers were louder now. Not about Jameer, about Ryan. Yo, he really messed with that kid. He didn't know. Does he even realize who that guy's family is? People avoided looking at him too long in the cafeteria. His old crew started sitting farther apart. One even switched tables completely. When Ryan walked down the hallway, people didn't make room. They stared, waited, like something was coming, and that something arrived 2 days later. School ended like any other day. Ryan lingered behind, hoping to catch Jamir alone. Maybe to talk, maybe to act like nothing had happened, maybe to say something that made him feel like he still had control. Instead, he saw them, 2 men, standing outside the school gates, not in a rush, not in uniform, but unmistakable. They weren't teachers, they weren't parents, they didn't belong. And yet somehow they did. Their suits were too sharp, too clean, their posture too calm, like they knew exactly where they were, exactly why they were there, and exactly who they were waiting for. Ryan froze. He knew. The taller one looked right at him, gave the faintest smile, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. Mr. DeSantis would like to have a word. That was it. Just a sentence. But it hit harder than anything Ryan had ever felt. He didn't ask questions. He didn't run. He followed. His legs moved, but his mind was frozen. Every step felt like walking deeper into something he couldn't name, couldn't understand. They didn't touch him, didn't push, just walked ahead, leading him down past the parking lot, toward the side road where staff parked. And there, leaning against a sleek black car, was Jamir, hands in his jacket pockets, head down slightly. Calm. Ryan stopped a few feet away, tried to breathe evenly, tried not to show the fear flooding his chest. Jamir looked up. Their eyes met. Ryan had looked at Jamir 100 times before, in class, in the cafeteria, on the field, but never like this. Because now there was no wall to hide behind, no audience, no schoolyard games, no friends laughing to fill the silence. Now it was just the truth. Jamir didn't speak for a long moment. He just watched, and that silence, it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Finally, Jamir stepped forward. He didn't look angry, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked with the kind of presence that made Ryan instinctively brace himself. Then Jamir stopped, just a breath away, close enough for Ryan to hear his voice, even though he didn't raise it above a whisper. "I don't need to touch you," Jamir said quietly. "But if I wanted to, your life would never be the same." Ryan didn't respond, couldn't. His breath caught in his throat, because it wasn't just a threat. It wasn't even a threat. It was a statement, a truth. No screaming, no fists, just that cold, steady truth. One word, one move, one call. And Ryan's whole world could end. He knew it, felt it, not just because of Jamir, because of what Jamir represented. He had grown up thinking his family was untouchable, that his name was enough to protect him, that the world revolved around him. Now he understood. He'd been living in a snow globe his whole life, and someone just tapped the glass. Jamir took a step back. He didn't smirk. He didn't look satisfied. He didn't need to. Ryan was already broken, already unraveling, because the real punishment had already started. It wasn't violence. It wasn't revenge. It was knowing he was no longer in charge, knowing that silence held more power than any insult ever could, knowing that Jamir didn't have to raise a hand to ruin everything, and worst of all, knowing Jamir chose not to. Ryan stood frozen in place as Jamir turned and walked away, disappearing into the car without another word. The men followed, the door shut, the engine hummed, and then they were gone. But the silence they left behind, that stayed, and it would stay for a long, long time. It was only one sentence, but it echoed in Ryan's mind like a scream trapped in a vacuum. "Do you understand now?" No threat, no anger, just that calm, steady voice. A voice that didn't need volume to command attention. It was quiet, controlled, surgical. Ryan hadn't answered, couldn't. He just stood there, eyes wide, mouth dry, heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. And Jamir? He didn't wait for a reply. He didn't need one. He already knew. The conversation ended with that question, but the message stayed. It followed Ryan home. It sat in the passenger seat while he drove. It hovered over his bed like a shadow that wouldn't leave. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just laid in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hearing that voice again and again. Do you understand now? It wasn't just about Jamir. It was about everything, about the illusion he'd lived under for years. Ryan used to think fear came from raised fists, from threats, from confrontation. But now he knew real fear wasn't loud. It was silent. It didn't announce itself. It just settled inside you, like poison in the bloodstream, unnoticed until it was too late. The next morning he woke up feeling heavier, not tired, drained, like something inside him had been pulled out and replaced with dread. School used to feel like his playground. Today it felt like a prison. Every hallway, every classroom, every face, they all reminded him of the person he used to be. He walked into the cafeteria and felt every stare, even if no one looked directly at him. People didn't point, they didn't laugh, they didn't whisper. But they knew, and that was worse. He avoided Jamir now. Not because he was scared of what Jamir would do, but because he was scared of how powerless he felt when he was near him. Jamir didn't threaten him. He didn't taunt him. He didn't even acknowledge him. And that made it worse, because that meant Jamir didn't see him as a threat. He didn't even see him as a rival. He just didn't see him. And Ryan, for the first time in his life, understood what it felt like to be invisible. Not by accident, by design. Days passed like that. Jamir went about his life, quiet, composed, unbothered. He wasn't avoiding Ryan, he simply wasn't thinking about him. But Ryan thought about him constantly. He started skipping football practice, stopped cracking jokes in class, didn't show up to lunch with his old crew. The guys who used to follow him like shadows, they drifted, one by one, slowly at first, then all at once, because no one follows a ghost. Ryan's old image, the confident leader, the charismatic bully, the boy who couldn't be touched, it was gone, and everyone knew it. But no one said it out loud, because they didn't need to. They could see it in the way he walked with his head down now, in the way he flinched at unexpected sounds, in the way he avoided mirrors. He started having dreams, the kind that didn't feel like dreams, more like flashbacks, but twisted. He'd be standing in the school hallway and everything would look normal, until he turned and saw Jamir staring at him from across the hall. And then the lights would go out, and he'd hear the whisper again. Do you understand now? He'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air, checking his phone for messages that weren't there. There were no more texts from unknown numbers, no more cryptic warnings, no more men in suits outside the school. And somehow that scared him more, because it meant Jamir didn't need to do anything else. He'd already won. Jamir hadn't ruined Ryan's life. Ryan had. He looked back at every choice he made, the mocking, the accidental bumps in the hallway, the jokes at Jamir's expense, and realized how shallow they were, how small, and how desperate. He wasn't defending anything. He wasn't asserting dominance. He was afraid that someone like Jamir, a black kid with no need for attention, no craving for approval, could exist in the same space without bending to him. Ryan had spent his whole life building a kingdom of insecurity, and Jamir didn't even need to break it. He just needed to walk past it like it wasn't there. And now everyone else saw it too. Ryan still walked the same halls, still sat in the same classrooms, but the world had turned. No one feared him anymore, not because they'd found someone stronger, but because they realized he'd never been strong in the first place. He was loud. Jamir was powerful, and those two things were never the same. Friday came, 1 week since the parking lot, 1 week since that sentence. Ryan stayed late again, pretending to work on a project, trying to avoid the awkward silence at home. As he stepped out of the building, he froze. Jamir was standing by his car, not leaning on it, not waiting like last time, just standing there, casual, calm, hands in his coat pockets. Ryan felt his chest tighten. His legs moved slowly, not by choice, but because there was nowhere else to go. As he got closer, Jamir didn't move, didn't smile, didn't glare. He just looked at him. Then, when they were only a few feet apart, Jamir spoke. Just one sentence. Again. Don't become who I let you walk away from. Ryan didn't understand it right away. Not fully, but it hit him hard, because he realized something even deeper than fear. Mercy. Jamir could have destroyed him, socially, psychologically, physically, but he didn't. And that was the real power. Jamir didn't want revenge. He wanted Ryan to live with it, to learn from it, to remember it. And that was the worst punishment of all. Because now Ryan would never forget. Not what he did, not who he did it to, and not who let him walk away.